Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Today is August 9th, 2021. This is a meeting of the SIG Network Policy API subgroup to SIG Network. This is a CNCF certified meeting, so please be nice to each other and let's have a productive day. Okay, so starting with the agenda, I don't have it pulled up because there's not much to share. No new issues to triage. The main goal of this meeting was just to continue the discussion on CMP that started 2 weeks ago. This will be the third discussion on CMP and user stories, also looking at some sample YAMLs. So how do y'all want to do this today? Should we just bring up, you want me to share the presentation or?
Yeah, I think Sanjeev was going to follow up with some of his examples, right? So
yeah, Sanjeev, do you want to share?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. Hey, Nadim.
I don't have screen sharing. I think you need to enable it.
Yep, sorry about that. I'll make you a co-host. I always forget about this. Make co-host. Okay, you should be good now.
Okay. So we can get going. So Nadeem, I don't know if you were in the call last Thursday, were you? We went over some of this. If you like, we can just do a quick recap to catch you up.
Yeah, that will be helpful. Sanjeev, I was not there in Thursday call.
Okay, so we'll just spend 5-10 minutes on that, and and then we can go on to additional points. And Abhishek, Andrew, Yang, I hope you got a chance to look at some of the changes that are made, at least to some extent, but we'll go over it again as well. And some of this we can, there's always multiple ways of doing some of these YAMLs. Yeah, so we're just kind of adding to the user stories slide deck that Abhishek prepared some couple of weeks ago. We kind of went through these use cases. There was some amount of back and forth on these. We won't go through these again. Yeah, some of these wordings were updated in response to the comments. And there's always a little bit more we can make it cleaner, but let's just go straight to the diagram and the YAMLs. So as shown in the diagram, again, we went over it before, but Nadeem, do you recall, are you comfortable with this description?
Yes.
Okay, so we just go to now here's a comparison we put together on, these two kinds of approaches that we've been talking about, and maybe it helps to just go over it again. So let's just call approach A as sort of the 3 actions approach, and approach B as priority ordering based approach. Okay. So there's a lot of text here. Let me do the following. Let me just give you 5-10 minutes to go over it, and then we can go over some of the points here. So just take 5 minutes and just kind of read through. I've updated it a little bit since Thursday. So if you either saw it on Thursday or haven't seen it, just take a few minutes to go through this. Okay. So yeah, so some key points are that in this 3 action solution, so far we've been talking about 3 kinds of actions: empower, deny, and allow. And they also sort of convey not just the action, but a priority where, there's a certain ordering. Empower is higher priority than deny, which is higher priority than allow. In the priority ordering, there's a separate way of resolving priorities, either through an explicit priority number or through ordering in the YAML. And the actions are still 2, deny and allow, and they are independent of priority. The other point is that, so with the three actions, right, the rules are aggregated by action type across the instances. So all empower rules across all the instances are clubbed together, and they are at a higher priority than all deny rules across all instances, and then all allow rules. Whereas here, there is a way to, in the approach B, there's a way to resolve priority both across CNPs and within CNPs. So across CNPs, there is an explicit priority number. Within CNPs, it's an order of listing. It could be implemented other ways also. You could have priority numbers within the CNP as well. But essentially, there is some sort of explicit ordering because the action does not encode the priority. Then we've talked about, the delegation and sort of deferring to the network policy. So in the approach A, the delegation is supported via a combination of the empower action and fall through from CNP to normal network policies. But the empower also performs deny exception. It's an exception to the deny rules. So that's also been one of the sort of wording confusions there, because sometimes empower was a deny exception and sometimes it was delegate. It really is a deny exception. Okay. And in this case of the priority kind of approach, the delegation is always by fall through. So that's sort of what it is. And then the deny means deny. And if you want to do any exceptions to the deny, you do it with match expressions. You can do things like, this deny applies to this, or matching this or not matching this. And then you just fall through, and then that becomes your delegation to the network policies. So the benefit of, so the syntax benefit of three actions is that you don't have to have explicit ordering. So which sort of matches with how network policy does it today, right? You have whitelist rules, you have a bunch of rules, and whichever rule it applies to, it matches. So there is some similarity there, which is good. Okay. And hence you can sort of aggregate those rules across policies, and you have that order independence. But because we've got denies, you have to then embed some priorities there. And that, I think, limits future extensibility, because every time you overload an action with a priority, that means when you add new actions, well, they have to have new priorities. Like, let's say we add a logging action or a monitoring action. Is that higher priority than deny or low priority? Well, you want to log at different points, right? You want to log before denying, you want to log after denying, you want to log before allowing. So coupling actions with priorities does have some kind of restriction, but it was needed in order to get that simplification, right? So that's sort of the pro and the con.
Quick question for you. Why do we care about logging before deny and after deny? Don't we just care about the policy, like saying what packet we've dropped or what packet we've allowed and logging that?
Yeah, so any kind of action. I mean, logging is just one, but firstly, you may want to log multiple, I mean, for the case of logging, yes. Now, here's the point, right? You want to log before and after, but if you just have one log, you can't do a priority before and allow as well as after and allow. Right? What is the priority of the log?
So is the CMP acting on the packet now? Like, it doesn't matter, right? So CMP is a wall, and that wall is either allowing or dropping a packet. All the log would do is say, this is what the packet is, and this is what we're doing to it. And that is only allow or drop, right? But are you saying one day it may be the CMP is going to SNAT the packet? So before the SNAT, we're going to log, and and after the SNAT, we're going to log again? I'm just kind of confused.
That could be one, but I will, it's, even if you just sticking with, so firstly, this applies to various kinds of actions, which we don't know in the future. One is logging, others could be SNATing, so on, right? But even if it is just, dropping a packet, you want to be able to see all the packets before the log, before the drop. And then if you have a logging dropping rule, you can see which are getting dropped Um,
So I
you may
think we
also-
just really quick here. I think we've been through this conversation, and I think we have some sort of like a difference in interpretation of the logging here. I think why Andrew is confused is that, you know, as we think about it, the logging should only be applying to, you know, whatever the final jurisdiction of the packet is. But I think I understand from Sanjeev's point, if we have this numeric priority model, for example, right? So we have a bunch of priority, which is, you know, 500, 400, and 200. Now logging as an action can be imposed at a specific priority, so that we know that at this priority level, the packet is still there. It's not being dropped. It's not being, you know, matched by any CMP rules and blah, blah, blah. But at the other priority, the packet has been dropped. So this would act as a sort of like a debugging tool where we can know, you know, where in the priority pipeline did the packet match one of the CMPs, or did it, you know, gets dropped or allowed or whatever by a CMP. So I think this is, if I'm understanding this correctly, this was Sanjeev's point. But you know, to our understanding, for example, if we do actually just have the 3 action rules and all the CMP rules are aggregated, this priority of logging doesn't really make any sense anymore. I don't know if I captured this correctly.
No, so let's keep that particular use case aside for the moment. But the basic point is that if you are combining actions, action type and priority, you are limited in future actions, because then you have to have it at that action can only be done at a certain priority compared to allow or deny, right? That's really the core point, that action type is a different thing than priority. And you want to be able to have any action at any priority. That's really the core point. Whether it applies to the logging action in every case, maybe yes, maybe no. But we're talking about future extensibility, which means that if the core point of the design is that the type of action is also encodes a priority, then you are limited when you introduce new actions, because they have to be introduced at a certain priority. And in general, even allow and deny normally should be independent priorities. Now we can decide that it's adequate to always have deny greater than allow or things like that. But that does, you know, limit what actions you can have in the future as well. In general, people would want independent controls on a priority versus the action type. That's really the bottom line in terms of future extensibility. So they're not equally future extensible in my view, but we can debate whether that's critical or not critical.
Just
come back to it. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to add my thought to this this particular point, I still feel the logging action doesn't have anything to do with the other actions, and they don't necessarily, logging should not necessarily be introduced as an action. I mean, it can be, but that's not necessary. It can be introduced as a node.
Same thing with debug, right? That this is some sort of operation or something similar.
Yeah, so
well, okay, here's
in
another
my mind, I think the use case that you're bringing forward is more like tracing rather than logging.
No,
So
that's why I said
and
let's not get stuck on that particular.
yeah, so I just want to
was-
voice my opinion on the extensibility. I think it's unclear for both the approaches. I mean, I can see Andrew has commented, and I think I +1 that comment on the slide.
Sure. My view is that the point here is whether you want to decouple action and priority, or whether you want to keep these as independent controls. So the more you have independence, the more you can have actions at any priority. That's the key point. And we can debate about the logging use case and so on, but the point is, like, for example, here's another thing, right? IP block, like, let's say we want to reintroduce IP block in some scenario. But with IP blocks, you can have overlapping CIDRs. And sometimes you want to do an action on a point with an IP block, which either a more significant or less significant CIDR. You want to have independent priority control. So this allows you.
Question around IP blocks. So I have been looking, but I haven't found an answer. When you use IP blocks, is there any rule that says that those addresses needs to be outside sort of the addresses assigned to pod services and the cluster network?
So, Per,
So for-
at the moment, at the moment, so here, at the moment, we are not sort of, we've kind of agreed to, at least for the moment, to not include IP block in CNP, right?
I know.
So
I
we
meant
can
just
definitely come back to
blocks
it, but
overall.
if you,
Yeah, I wanted to answer that question from network policy perspective. And the documentation mentions that it should be external to the cluster and not
perfect.
the pod IP. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
yeah, but it's possible that CNIs are not necessarily checking to see that IP block siders are non-cluster IPs. Because it is dependent on the CNI implementation. Anyway, so yeah, we can come back to IP block and things like that. The point here is about future extensibility when you have independent controls of priority in action versus the action embeds the priority, right? So that's sort of the key point here. The rest of it,
I think for the sake of time, we could probably move on to the 4B point where we had the confusion last time about because the other YAMLs are like really straightforward and we all agree on, it's essentially it's solvable by both approaches, right?
Yeah. So the point about the YAML discussion was also about usability or sort of the cleanness of the YAML or the length of the YAML and so on, right? So should we very briefly recap, because I think neither Per nor Nadeem were at the Thursday call, but we could jump to 4B if you like and come back either way. Maybe we spend 5 minutes on the previous ones.
Okay, if you want.
Okay. So yeah, so you can go over this later as well. So we'll skip the use cases 1 and 2. They're basically just either always allow or always deny. So there's not a huge difference one way or the other.
So for Per and Nadeem, I think both 4B and 3A is kind of like a clean slate, right? So can we directly jump to 4B? Because I think that's the one more interesting, and we might end up with no time.
I did have a quick question on
I think
3A for
3A and others are also
Abhishek.
pretty significant, actually. Look at this, right? This is quite a lot of YAML here. Okay, this is a key point, and I'll come back to that. But Andrew, go ahead and mention your.
I just had a question for Abhishek and Yang. On this one, I'm missing something, I think, when we've talked about it. Why do we have to empower and strictly allow here? Like, why can't we just say we want to allow system namespace and core DNS?
So I can take that. In this case, what we wanted to do was, so the empower intra namespace traffic, right? This is going to be skipped from the deny rule. So that's why we wanted to add it into the empower rule. And the other one is we want to always allow the core DNS traffic. But the way we are writing the deny rule is to deny from all namespaces. So that's why we are skipping the core DNS traffic from the deny rule, and then explicitly allowing the core DNS part. So that's the reason why. So the empower is basically skipping the denies, and then if there is no strict allow to allow the traffic, then it goes to the tenant as a delegate. But if there is, as a cluster network policy owner or administrator, I want to strictly allow core DNS traffic, then I will choose it to put it in the allow rules. Is that clear?
Yeah, but what would be the actual result if you didn't empower anything? So you just have a deny everything, and then allow system namespace, allow core DNS. Would that still
so the deny wins, so then it will be denied.
Okay, that makes sense. And then the last part was the user story didn't say anything about intra namespace, and this delegates into namespace.
We could remove the inter namespace part.
Cool. It was just noticing it from the
Cool.
slide.
No, thank you. Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, just also I have a quick point on this. So essentially, I was discussing this with Abhishek on, how, because you can see here in empower and allow rules, right? So we're duplicating a lot of stuff here because the action we wanted to do with a lot of things here, both in and strong allow those. We were thinking about something like making the actions a list rather than just one specific action. So we can do something like for those workloads we wanted to both empower and allow. That will make the YAML shrink in a significant amount because we're essentially it's more logical, but again, it's gonna be a little bit more complicated than what we have here, because now if that's the case, we needed to validate in the actions list we can't have something like allow plus deny, which doesn't really make sense. So I think empower and allow is a really valid use case for this purposes, but we didn't really want it to sort of like introduce another action, which means empowers plus allow. That will be a little bit more even more confusing. So
just to understand, so empower here means that okay, we skip coordinates is not denied, and the allow part is saying okay, this part is allowed.
Yes.
If someone would add something in the allow that didn't match to the empower, it would be denied anyway, right? Because
right, exactly. So for this use case, for example, what's allowed needs to be a subset of at least a subset of what's empowered. Absolutely. Otherwise, that won't.
And if I didn't write the allow, I would have to write a separate spec to allow it, which would then match with.
No, they won't, because okay. Remember, every rule is aggregated, so allow rules are always has lower priority than deny rules. So as long as there is
if you have the empower, but the empower does more. If you would
right. So if you have two YAMLs
here, but not allow, just allow for one thing, could you add the allow for them in a separate spec there, or this has to be in the same?
No, you can add in another spec. Okay, everything perfect. Is aggregated.
Perfect. Okay.
So yeah, I think that this would be a point of confusion. Like this use case specifically, I really think would confuse people. Maybe if you did, like you said, make the actions a list. So like empower allow, comma allow would make more sense.
I think so. If you want to have them all right? But yeah.
Like I can't think of a time you would have a deny, obviously, and a deny and allow without an empower, right? You just said that makes no sense. So.
And let's say I'm weird. I only want to sort of have. I would want, and when you have issue and monitoring, I would only want to have one. Can I then have action and many empower with just one match? I can do, right? I can have as many empower actions as I want in here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
This is actually good feedback. I mean, we initially thought, or at least this was my thought, that a list would need a lot of validation. But if it makes things clearer and more compact and everyone agrees to it, I think that will be a good.
So it comes back to one part is the semantics that's in here, and then you have the sort of how it's expressed with the different ways to showing things and packaging things. But I think, at least for me, the semantics of what's in here is clear, and then it can be packaged in many ways, several ways.
So a couple of thoughts from my side, and one is sort of the first point, which is that duplication, right? You have to add a lot of YAML to first empower it, and then that exact same traffic, then you have to put the allow, as we said, right? I think this is probably not clean and good. Secondly.
Yeah, so my point being, if we have action as a list, then we get rid of the problem.
Absolutely, but then you can do it together if you want, or separate if you want.
Yeah, so the second point is that this basically empower is basically deny exception. It's not really delegating. It is just saying skip the denies and then continue doing what you're doing. Because if you're allowing, then you're allow. If you don't allow, then you delegate. So the
Right.
keyword, this is not even, this is just saying, this is an exception to the deny, in which case it should maybe rationally be under deny as a subcategory. Okay, deny
Yeah.
accept. This is basically a
Yeah,
deny
yeah.
accept. Okay, and that way you don't have to repeat it. If you want a deny accept, call it a deny accept. It's not an empower. Okay, empower means delegate, and this is not delegating. This is just getting around the deny and then continuing the rest of it, which maybe allow, maybe delegate.
So basically, you're saying is that the naming is something misleading, and I think that's a valid point. It's something
Yeah.
that
Yes.
we don't really want to get stuck with names, but in the end, as long as the semantics of this 3-action proposal makes sense, I think naming is up for grabs.
Yeah,
we are more than happy
not
for
just
more.
naming, but then if it's if we really want to have a deny exception, then it has to be under deny, just like IPPub exception. But then the other one, and I have a slide on a few different simplifications like this, would be if you want to keep it at the top level, then call it something else like a skip or a delegate. But that delegate is truly skipping everything else in the CNP. A delegate immediately jumps to the net pole rather than sort of partially skipping the denies and then going back to the allows. Okay, so that's another simplification. So first, let's just compare the way things are right now, and then we can talk about simplifications.
Just one more question, just to understand them. So let's say that we have something that's been empowered. Let's call it, well, some other component X. And then there is no anywhere allow. Does it then fall back on the action deny, since, yeah, I empowered you, but you didn't use the power? So something that's been empowered, but there is no allow action for it anywhere. What happens?
It does. It just falls through, which means it's something is empowered either if it is explicitly empowered, but there is no deny or allow rule for it.
Yeah.
Or if it is not mentioned at all, then it falls through and is implicitly, I mean, it is effectively also empowered because the net pol can do whatever he wants with it.
Yeah, so to answer per your question, yes, if there is no strict allow that allows it, then it falls through to the network policies. And if there is no network policy which is actually isolating or allowing that traffic, then the default is to allow.
So,
and
this is okay. So the empower goes all the way down
to network policies.
Through well, yeah. It's so far network policies. That's the only one. And if there's no allow there, it's denied. But if it's an allow there, it's allowed. Okay.
If there is no rule that is actually matching that, even a network policy, then actually the cluster defaults and Kubernetes cluster default is to allow, so we allow it. That is also something that I have added in the initial slide. What should be the default disposition of such traffic where there is no rule matching? Wow. But that's maybe we can come back to that.
You could say that it doesn't matter, right? Here you have said if you really want to allow it, you would say it. So you would say that I don't really care if this traffic is allowed or denied. If someone wants to allow it, he can allow it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So it just falls through to anything. Just falls through to net pol does whatever net pol does. It can allow the default. The normal rules of net pol apply. And so the point is that empower is not always empower. In fact, empower here is basically deny exception. And when you deny accept, you do a deny exception, but don't have an allow for it, then it effectively becomes a delegate. So the point is that was, I think it can be cleaner than that. And also that implies that you have to mention everything twice. First, if you want to strong allow it, first you have to empower it, but then you have to put a strong allow.
Right. Okay.
So,
that makes sense. I think we had already covered some of that. Should we move on to?
Yeah, you're moving on. So now how would you do it with approach B? I think it would be a lot simpler. You would simply, so here's the example, right? You want to say, so firstly, again, just maybe for Per and Nadim's clarification, since you weren't there. Now you have the option of putting an order field in a CNP. So rather than just aggregating across the CNPs, if you have two different CNPs which have a overlap, then whichever is the higher priority takes precedence, right? So you can have an explicit order field, and within your rules, you can have multiple matches, and they are prioritized in the order of in which they are listed in the YAML. So in the previous example, you have empower implicitly higher priority than, let's say, deny and allow, but you could write in the YAML allow ahead of deny or ahead of empower. So the ordering in the YAML doesn't tell you what's the order in which the operations are prioritized. So here there is an order across the CNPs with the numbering, and the order within the CNP is based on the way the YAML, whatever comes first in the YAML is higher priority. So here we don't have to assume that deny is always higher priority than allow. There can be scenarios we want the other way around and so on. And here's one example, right? So here the whatever you had in this rather long and complex YAML can be done with a much simpler and shorter YAML, because what you're saying is, okay, allow ingress from your mandatory namespaces, like your Istio and monitoring, and these are your strong allows, and then these are your strong denies. So deny everything that is not in the same tenant, and everything else falls through. So you don't have to mention anything twice. Okay, you either clearly allow something, or you clearly deny it, or you fall through. You
So
don't have to-
where's allow from DNS here? That was in the user story. That was my comment.
Oh, okay, we'll just have a DNS as an allow as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
this is slightly different, right? Here you now allowed both Istio system and monitoring. Oh, you did that in the other one too. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, here I think it was, yeah, this was right. So you did the same thing here for Istio system. Where was it?
But there's no way to let something be open and be the sort of just handled by the cluster default, which I'm
Yeah,
okay
this
with.
is why we're mentioning we should jump to 4B, which is another use case.
Yeah, I think 4B covers what Peter is wanting to say.
Stay a bit. So I would say what's good with this one is that you have all information in here. I know if I look at this one, I have everything I need here. If I go to the second one, I'm going to have to scratch my head and say, how many more orders are there? How do I know? Is it just one or is it 20 others? It's sort of an open set. So how do I know if I have all the information?
Yes, so that's true for both, but the difference is that in one, there is aggregation across CNPs. So you can,
Yes, absolutely.
yeah. And so the benefit of the 3 actions approach is
You're
that,
right. You can do the same. Okay, I get what you mean. Yeah.
yeah. But the difference here is simply, and again, the point about the order is not to use it, not to rely on it, right? This is just a way of conflict resolution so that you don't have to encode the priority into your allows and denies, and you don't have to sort of use empower as a way to get around the deny, right? You're simply saying, this is what I clearly want to allow. This is what I clearly want to deny. Everything else falls through. So it's simpler and cleaner in my view. And I think it's pretty clear that it is simpler and cleaner. Any other notes here? So I have some notes here. You can look at it later. Okay, so
Yeah,
now
that's cool. Also, this just FYI on 4. No, you can go to 4. 4, I think we did that backwards too. On slide wherever we listed the user stories, I think we were 4A was showing 4B. So if you see 4B was strictly deny inter namespace traffic, but delegate intra namespace traffic. That's what this is doing, right? It's semantics, but it was confusing.
Yeah, I think you're correct.
Cool. Okay, just heads up on that.
Yeah, so basically this is, the normal tenant isolation case, deny traffic
I put it right there on the right. It's strictly deny inter namespace traffic, but delegate intra namespace traffic to the developers.
Right. So with the CNP approach, you would empower it explicitly, and then you would deny the inter namespace. So here again, you don't need to empower it, because the other approach is basically anything that you rely on fall through to delegate, right? You only write the ones that the cluster admin writes, the ones that he clearly wants to allow or deny. Everything else falls through and automatically is a delegate, right? So, so here it basically says, okay, I just have one deny rule, okay, which is that every traffic coming from a namespace that is not in my tenant should be denied. That's it. Everything else falls through. So again, simplification, because you don't have to kind of skip over the allows or the denies. You just put what you want to deny and everything else falls through.
Oh, so if I have two tenants on the system that decide that they want to be able to allow traffic in between their namespaces, the namespace on each side, how would I do that?
So we'll get to one way to do that.
Approach B.
So one way to do that is 4B, which we're going to talk about now. But the other point to note is that we are making an assumption about a particular tenancy model, but the admin may want to have various kinds of tenancy models. One of it could be that, okay, if you tenants want to freely exchange within each other, basically you're one tenant as far as the admin is concerned. Okay, you can decide that these 3 namespaces belong to you and these 4 namespaces belong to you, but you want to have no boundary between those namespaces. So for my purposes, you're one tenant. So that's one model.
But,
the second model is,
don't you risk that if you have it open that people can hijack and sort of force themselves in?
no, they want to, what I'm saying is that there will be various kinds of self-service models, some in which the tenants say we want to enforce the tenancy boundary, but if we only want this one or this 2 holes. The other one is, and then we want to have the admin configure those holes, and otherwise we want to enforce the tenancy boundary. The other one is, well, we frequently expect to need to access traffic from each other's namespaces, so we will not have a tenancy boundary, and because we will allow, it is a self-managed tenancy, which is what is there today. So we are not enforcing a exact tenancy model. We want to give them the tools to allow different kinds of tenancy models, some of which are more namespace controlled and some of which are more admin controlled. So, okay, and let's go to 4B, but that also shows one example of that. So we saw this is 4A. So basically, again, in both these cases, we've seen that the main point here is that with approach B, you don't need to put an empower just to get around the deny and then again duplicate that in the allow.
But
you just go straight through.
So one thing is like, so today everything is bound pod to pod, right? And it's just to open up a bit this discussion. Personally, I see no problem to say that between tenants you shouldn't touch each other's pod directly. You should go through a service and sort of. And
yeah, that's the next one. I think if you just click through Sanjeev to 4B, I think that covers what you're about.
Yes. To say. So yeah. So firstly, you should always be going through a service, but since policies
I agree with you on that. Everyone doesn't, but I'm in that camp.
Right, but because we don't have network policies based on services, right? We have policies that are eventually applied to pods. At the end of the day, these network policies are all about pods. Now that's where this is again future extension, where we want to match, right? Having different kinds of match actions. Another action could be match on the service rather than match on the pods or the pod selectors. And, that's of its own. Okay, so now let's talk about 4B. So 4B is strict deny, but delegate the exceptions. So if you have the 3 actions approach, right? Now there are 2 ways to do this, whether you want to do it on the server side or the client side. So here's one way, right?
That's not valid, I don't think. That's just my opinion. You can't, it changes the way that we looked at this user story. It's a different user story, right?
Fine, we'll do both user stories. The point is that, again, this is functionally when you want to expose a service. So you can expose it on the client and the server and so on. So just we have cases for both. So no worries. So let's look at it, right? So what we are saying here is that a particular tenant is publishing a public service, right? So this is an example where it is showing it that from the client side, right? So it is saying, oh, sorry, did I? Oh, you changed it to egress. Okay, sorry. Then Abhishek, I thought you had the ingress version here as well.
Oh yeah,
First.
I took your feedback and I changed it.
Okay, so earlier there was an ingress. Okay, so there was an ingress example here. So we'll come back to the egress example in a minute. So here is the corresponding ingress example, and then we'll look at the egress example. So if you want to do it with ingress controls, again, that is an implementation choice as long as the functionality is the same. So with ingress controls, the approach could be that, okay, either you have a particular class of tenants that are publishing services, or you want to do it for exactly one particular tenant, and you match accordingly, right? And again, it's very simple, because it is simply saying the guy who's publishing the service will say, okay, cluster admin, please allow me to publish this service by not enforcing the tenancy boundaries on this service, which is exposing this public service. So the cluster admin says, okay, I'm going to put the tenancy boundary around all your pods except the guys that are, tell me who is allowed, or here's the label that you should use so that I do not enforce a tenancy boundary on that, and I'll let you decide what you want with that.
So this policy is still executed by the cluster admin, but it leaves this hole with the
Correct.
value pub service.
Correct. So all your services which are not public service will be controlled by the tenancy boundary. That means they will be denied traffic from other namespaces. But I will not apply that to your public pods, and so you can publish that.
But so when you say pub service here, it is that the address you would get when you do say that the service is a load balancer, or is it something else you're thinking of here?
This is the pod selector. There's a label.
Okay, so, it's just a pod. So you still do this. It's still pod to pod. We're not talking about something towards a service definition.
So yes, and that's because we are still talking about policies that apply to pods. Now,
okay, I think we should open up, but we can do that next week to talk to services. It's not that hard to do.
Yeah, that's also
for ingress to that sort of, or egress to a service is no problem. Ingress is a different thing, right? When something arrives at the pod, then it's hard to know if you were addressed as a service or not in some, depending on how the CNI implements the DNAT, so to speak, where it's done, but it's clearly doable.
Yeah, exactly. So that is one of the things, again, it's all in the list of possible future extensions. That's why adding different kinds of matches. You have to be open to allowing future kinds of matches and actions, and matching on service is a possible action. Now, it so happens that in the case of cluster IP services, very often the way you define a service is by having a particular selector on your pods, right? And then your replica set sort of looks for pods with that selector. So in this case, this is almost like a service match, but you're absolutely right. And that has been considered in the past, but it has been kept out of scope to have additional kinds of matches based on services rather than pods. So anyway, the point is that, so this is what
I have some,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have some questions on the solution too. Can we also look at that? Thanks.
Oh, on the solution 2, yeah. So that's where we are going now. Okay. So with the solution 2, is this yours? Okay, yeah. So this is, again, I just repeated yours. I thought you had that. So here we are doing it on the egress. So if you wanted to do it on the egress, how would you do it? So again, without necessarily having an empower action. So again, you would make an exception by just dealing with your match criteria. So basically what we want to do is we want to deny traffic going to other tenants, but for traffic going to the public service, we want to delegate that and let the tenant namespace developer handle it. So basically what we're saying is we have an egress policy where if the destination namespace is not the public namespace, right? And a different tenant, then deny it. Okay, so deny traffic going to a different tenant, which is not the public tenant. And also deny traffic, which is going to the public or other than the public service. So deny traffic, which is going to another tenant, which is not the public tenant, and to pods which are not the public pods. So again, you basically the point is that you've essentially done the deny exception with regular pod selectors and match expressions, and you don't need to empower anything. Whatever doesn't match falls through, and that is automatically empowered. So the point here is that you can still have allows and denies, and then you can put your match expressions to select whatever you want to strongly allow and deny, and then things just fall through, and that automatically becomes delegated to the network policy. So you can do this or either on the egress side, like here, or on the ingress side as a previous example. And yeah. So the key point here was that the empower, which is really actually more or less a deny exception. If you want to deny exception, then you just do deny exceptions using match expressions and so on. If you want to have a new keyword for that, fine, we can do that too, but it's not absolutely necessary. And there are the pros and cons we've talked about earlier. So briefly, a few other points. Well, before we go to that, Abhishek, any feedback or thoughts? Or anybody else?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Abhishek. My internet was really unstable today, but I'll let you finish first.
Yeah, sorry. I think first thing that I can see here is that we don't allow namespaces and namespace selector to be part of the same because they're mutually exclusive. So
Yeah.
that
we would put the namespace selector inside the namespaces. Basically, you need the namespaces with the scope as well as with the match expression. So if we define the namespaces appropriately, we can do that.
Yeah, so that was also my point, is that, as you were explaining this YAML to us, I think the assumption is that, for the selectors you put here as a match expression or match labels or whatever, those are sort of like logically ended with whatever the namespaces that you provide as keyword scopes, right? So essentially what you're saying is that we needed a way to sort of like union some selections. So the namespaces could be selected by labels, by expressions, and we also introduced a bunch of things that are not in Kubernetes network policy right now, which is self namespace, not self namespace, and for the tenant purposes, now even the same labels and not same labels, and plus we needed a way to do whatever is selected by those kind of like mechanisms. We needed a way to end them together or union them together. This is also not a sort of like observed practice in upstream Kubernetes network policy right now, because in network policy, usually, in a same namespace selector, you can either do a match expression or a match labels. There's no way you can sort of like union two selections together. Is our point, I guess.
No, so two things. One is namespaces is something that we are introducing, so we can do whatever works for us. And secondly, in Kubernetes, yes, you can match, you do logically and match labels and match expressions from my understanding. So if I had a match labels here, it would, if I recall correctly.
So to give an example, in Kubernetes, you cannot and namespace selector with IP block because that's conflicting. Similarly, the same point here, namespace selector and namespaces are not mutual. I mean, they're mutually exclusive.
Yeah. So the point is that
so here's a question.
Yeah.
Let's think about the intra namespace traffic within the same namespace. For a particular tenant, right? How does this expression in the two matches? Like, what is the one that matches? Like, how? It's pretty ambiguous to me right now. So how would you define that? Let's talk for.
So that just falls through. So basically, again, whatever is explicit.
No, it just falls through. But tell me how it falls through. Why does it fall through?
Yeah, I'm getting there. So what are you explicitly denying? You're denying traffic that is going to a different tenant, which is not the public tenant, right? So you're basically logically ANDing these two. The action is deny. And what are you denying? You're denying traffic going to a different tenant, but not going to the public tenant. So that means.
Can you see that there are potential conflicts for namespace selectors and namespaces, that when you're saying ANDing, there could be certain values evaluated by the first expression, certain values evaluated by the second expression, and they may not be deterministic.
I'm not sure what you're saying. Are you saying that it is not possible to have a logical expression which basically says deny traffic to other tenants which are not the public tenant?
So I think what Abstract was thinking in the terms is that, because you're matching name, you have a namespace match, not same labels, which in plain English we will translate to match namespace at not our own tenant, right? Okay. So what if there is a namespace that has public NS in our own tenant? Then what will those two union come to?
That will not be denied. This deny rule is
so essentially everything in our own tenant, right, which doesn't have pub NS, will not be selected by the first expression. And
yeah.
So essentially, what you're saying, I get you what you're saying. I think what you're saying is like a strict logical end, right? So, as long as some namespace doesn't appear in any of the selectors, then I mean, as long as a namespace appear in any of the selectors here, then it will be in the final result, essentially. It's just that, this also needs some sort of like clear definition where, we needed to be really clear on, how the union of the namespace selection is done here.
Okay, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you're saying. So basically the point is that we are defining this namespaces structure, right, as part of the skip. And we are adding these things like same labels and self and not self. So either you can do the logical ANDing like this, because today in a namespace selector, when you have two expressions, they are logically ANDed. Or you can, since we are defining the namespaces structure, we can define this sort of logic inside the namespaces structure itself. And that way we don't need two, a match expressions and a namespace to define. So this one is up to us to define. One way to do it is to do logical AND like this. But as Abhishek said, currently the namespaces was seen to be an alternative to namespace selector. So if we just want to have namespaces, this match expression should be allowed as a logical AND under namespaces, which we are defining. Bottom line is this, okay? It is saying this deny rule, normally we would have said deny traffic to all other tenants, right? Now we are saying deny traffic to all of the tenants except those, that which has the public namespace. So don't deny to the tenant which is publishing the public service, deny to all of the tenants. And then this additional rule is if you want to also deny to other pods of the public tenant. We can play around with this. We can play around with this. And as I said earlier, there are other ways to do it also. In practice, I believe that when you want to have these holes, a admin will take a simpler approach, which will say, okay, I'm going to enforce the egress boundaries. Either you want to self-control all your holes. So I can choose to only enforce the system boundaries like cluster DNS and Istio, and you manage your holes. Or you want to publish a service that should only be reachable from outside the cluster, just like any other service. You don't make a special case for clients which are in the same cluster. Or I'll leave you manage your egress. I'll block your ingress. You can do all these variations. But if you really want to have, okay, the admin also manages egress, but has a selective hole. So here's one way to do it. So the point is that there are a few different ways to do it. And again, the delegation happens by whatever falls through. Whatever falls through gets delegated.
So we are pretty much at time. I think kind of an interesting question is what's easier, explicitly defining what's delegated versus just having to do the opposite of that, what's not delegated.
No, but we are not explicitly defining what's delegated. We are explicitly defining what is not strongly denied. It still may or may not get delegated, right? Because so that's where let's, if you have a few.
But if you look at 4B approach A, I mean, you're explicitly defining it, and that's why it is longer. That's the whole point, right? That's why it is a little bit longer of a YAML. You're explicitly defining what you're delegating. That is being done is if there's only a delegate or if there's a delegate and an allow. That's explicit, right?
I think to answer both of your points, first to Andrew's point, I think in this particular case, the 4A first kind of YAML is shorter because we are not looking at the opposite of what should be explicit denied. We just poke holes. So the logical complement of what should be delegated, it's a little bit it's a little bit harder to express, as you can see here in the second example. And I think what was the point, Sanjeev, that you were mentioning about this?
So what I was saying was when you're using Empower, you're always
Right. So that I agree. This is just a skip to the denies. It's not. So what we're saying here is as in 4B is that we have an empower rule and we don't have a strong allow rule. But obviously, yes, it doesn't stop other people or the cluster admin from defining an allow rule in another YAML in the CMP, and then it will become a strong allow rather than the delegate. Yes, I understand both of the points.
So since we are running out of time, I'll just mention a few quick thoughts. Okay. So one thoughts, if we want to take some ideas from all of these, or let's say I still see value in both of these, but just a few kind of thoughts about alternate simplifications, right? So one is that instead, perhaps, of the current definition of empower, if we really want to have 3 actions, maybe the action can be called skip or delegate. And that, instead of doing a deny exception, simply skips all the remaining CNPs. It goes straight to the net pole, right? So there it is a true delegate because it is not a deny exception anymore, right? So if you want to, if you want to have 3 actions and you feel there is an advantage of having that explicit action for delegate, then call it a delegate, and the functional behavior of that should not be a deny exception. It is simply saying, I'm skipping everything else. I'm just going straight to the network policy. It's an exit or an escape. Okay. No, don't process any more CNPs, go straight to net pole. So that's one thought. The second thought is, if we really want to have a deny exception, which is what Empower is currently doing, then don't call it Empower, then it is a deny exception, right? So you can either call it a deny exception or just place it under the deny section as deny blah, 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 except this. So that is what is a deny exception. So right now what we're doing is actually a deny exception, but we are putting it at the top as an Empower. So that's a little confusing. We can do that. We can address that either by calling it a deny exception or just having a skip, which just skips every action.
Exactly, because as a cluster owner that we run this, you have granted access. Sort of that, as far as you know, with Empower, people can, pods can talk to each other. Using that Empower, if they then actually do it, it's something you don't care about. You have always said it's okay. And then on the ingress side, you sort of has accepted that these things can set up communication to me. If their egress rules doesn't allow it, okay, not my problem.
Right. So what we are saying, maybe we are saying the same thing here, which is that today Empower is not, it's not really empowering. Okay.
Absolutely. And it just makes it more complicated.
Right. So if you want to have an explicit action, then call it, call it delegate, and that just skips over all the remaining CNPs, not just the denies, right? Or if you want to do the deny exception, then call it a deny exception and put it under deny. So that's one thought. Okay, the second thought is, if we do feel like we want to overload the priority and the action, then confirm that that is okay for future extensibility. But I would also suggest that we look at it the other way around, which is that if you want to have static priorities, maybe allow should be higher priority than deny, because the examples that I've played with seem to work better by making allow to be higher priority. If you want to have, if we really want to have strict priorities between overloaded on the actions, maybe make it the other way around, which is allow is the higher priority than deny. So we can go over that. The third possibility of simplification is not even have an explicit allow action. Okay, only have skip and deny. That means that the purpose of CNP is only to do strong denies, everything else is skipped. That could be even a further simplification. So we just skip all the strong allow cases. We just say, I'm going to strongly deny this, and I'm going to use skip to do deny exceptions, and everything else is delegated. So that's a further simplification.
But Sanjeev, I remember earlier you mentioned that even from a persona perspective, right? I should be able to do each and everything from CNP level if I have that persona, and if I want to do that. This will force me to go to KNP.
Yeah. So again, you're right, and we are in order to what the point here is, if we again want. If we decide that we really want to have 3 actions, maybe we can modify those 3 actions in the following way. But it remains that overloading priority and action is sort of a non-intuitive thing, right? So either we decide we are not going to overload priority with action, which means we have to have a separate priority. Then either you have priority ordering or something like that. But if we to collectively say, no, we do want to overload priority with action, then like you said, it does limit the admin's possibility, but our focus is on simplicity at that point. And we say, okay, either we are going to have allows to be higher priority than denies, or we just have no allows at all. We delegate all the allows and only we do the strong denies. yes, it reduces functionality, but it avoids these, complex scenarios like deny exception plus strong allow and all that. And
Yeah,
then finally,
I think this is, sorry, go ahead, finish up.
and then the last point is that you can also decide, okay, fine, having explicit priorities is good because you're never overloading it, but I still want to have an explicit delegate rather than fall through, right? So what we discussed so far was delegate happens automatically by fall through when you have explicit priorities. But no, I also want to have a delegate. So you can have priorities plus a delegate as an action. And there you do not need to assume that delegate is, empower greater than, you don't have to overload the priorities. You can have priorities independent and you can have actions independent, and you can still have a delegate or a empower action. So all of these sort of hybrids are possible. I know I mentioned a lot here without us having the time, so we can think about it later. So feel free to kind of look at these and send us comments. Go ahead, Andrew, you had some quick thoughts.
No, I just wanted to wrap up. I think this is a good slide. Yeah, does anyone else have any last things before we wrap up for this one?
I have thoughts on each and every point, and we can take it up next week. Right?
Yeah, no, totally. I think something that might help people just kind of joining the scene, or if we have to present this to SIG Network at some point, is going to be getting all these little reference things figured out and like actually standardizing how we're making these YAMLs. So when I say that, I mean have the same tenant name in every YAML, like be able to refer back to the diagram for every single YAML. Because right now it's not super clear, at least to me, some of those continuity things across these various examples.
That's a great point. How do we achieve that? Like, I tried to add some, concrete names, but they were not really well thought of. So, any suggestions to standardize those, that would be great.
I think we just go everything off that diagram that Yang made. I think and if we're missing anything, like let's voice those opinions ASAP in comments. If not, we can use the names that are already on the diagram. So then literally, like if people are looking through this, they can just jump back to the diagram slide and be like, oh, okay, that's what we're referencing here. That makes sense.
Yeah, so I think maybe the comment here is that maybe we can add some labels to each of those pods and namespaces.
Yeah.
So that we know how to select. So we know the names, but we don't have like some labels to select them. So I think so that will then.
I think Yang used some of these labels, which are actually the same as the labels in the picture that I had. And then but you might have skipped some of the labels. Like for example, this one here, we're using service pub as a tenant, but then, which is, so we can just
comment accordingly.
Yeah, they're more or less matching, but we can make it even more exact.
Sounds good. Okay, everyone. Well, thanks for hanging around. Really, really good discussion today. I think we're moving forward. Let's comment on these slides and hopefully try to wrap up with this presentation, at least in the next 1 or 2 meetings.
And the good thing is now we have a clear comparison. So if anytime somebody asks, okay, actions versus priority, there's a bunch of material here which shows, okay, these are the pros and cons, whatever we decide to go with, or we decide to go with a hybrid, we have the background documented. So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
okay.
I will add some more points to that slide.
Great. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. And I will see you all next week. Really appreciate it. Have a good one.
Thanks, Andrew. Bye.
Thanks, guys.